Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. With me today is Andrea Lown, a creative product developer and marketer currently working at PayPal. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Andrea, I'm just looking at a few things you've written about yourself, and you say you value responsible risk-taking in challenging the status quo. Now, I love the notion of responsible risk-taking. As an entrepreneur, I wish I was a little more responsible from time to time, but let me know what that means to you.
I think when you work for yourself, the scale of responsibility is a little fuzzier than when you work for others. So I've gone back and forth between working for myself and working for big businesses. And when I'm at a place like PayPal, there's like certain criteria you have to meet to take a risk. So I think it's really knowing where the line is, depending on where you're working and what you're doing, and figuring out how can you push the boundaries and take some risks, but set expectations with everyone you're working with that, hey, this is an experiment, or this is the expected result, but it could be this. Like, you sort of have to, you got to work with the people around you and their appetites for risk and really kind of position yourself correctly for it.
Well, even as an entrepreneur, I mean, I think we should learn more about that, whether you're, I mean, as an entrepreneur, as you're talking about, yeah, they're going to put some pretty strict guidelines. But as an entrepreneur, I mean, we met a number of years ago. It was after I wrote my second book on entrepreneurship, Cause of Disturbance. And in it, I continued to develop something that I call the 90% rule. And not a formula philosophy that I had really early in my career when my partner, Lori, and I, we were manufacturing natural bath and body, but this was super early. We were the first private brand in Walmart with in this category. So basically said, 90% is what you're good or great at. 10%, we're always got to do something new, but we can't put ourselves out of business.
Right.
So we would literally look at what we could, just think about throughput, what we were 90% of the way there towards making. So going from shampoos to women to men to pets, etc. And it was always like, okay, so if we're wrong, we're not going to go bankrupt. And if we're right,
Yeah,
it could be,
we
so
could do
that's,
okay here. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
no, but I think it's critical, and I think it's great to learn it. So just entrepreneur versus entrepreneur, because you've been both, like, how do you sort of guide yourself? What have you learned?
Yeah, I think you're right. That 10% has to be pretty strategic. Like, you don't want to limit yourself to how much you can do by sticking to the 90, but you have to find a way to do the 10% that's meaningful. So,
Yeah.
like, that 10% has to be just like constantly talking to customers and figuring out, like, what are you not telling me? Like, what can't you tell me that is not like, an action of you picking something off the shelf and my sales going up? Like, I think we have to be willing to listen. We have to be willing to like fail and get it wrong. But if you do that in a way that's like not detrimental to the 90%, it feels a little more comfortable. Like, I think it's crazy to risk everything on a new idea. Like, that doesn't necessarily sit well with my heart, but like, you do have to push the boundaries. And I think, as an entrepreneur or just generally as an experimenter, you can design the experiment around it not tanking everything. So I think that's for me, that's the
Yeah.
critical, like, okay, how do I test this theory, or how do I test this hypothesis without really like impacting the stuff that's already going well or that I think is working? But it's a constant loop of experimenting for sure.
Yeah. And you said something really interesting in there. When you're talking about constantly experimenting, you talk about, well, speaking to customers and or
Yeah.
talking with customers. And so many times I hear from people, oh, I talk to my customers every day. And I said, no, you don't. You sell to them every day, but you don't talk to them. So
Yeah, that's a good
what do you,
call.
yeah, what do you mean by that? Like what goes into talking and learning from your customers?
I worked with a really interesting guy. This is years ago. And he actually, I think, came from working on the brand like Pampers.
Okay.
And they had a mandate at the time that all product managers had to speak to customers for an hour a day, which is a really, I mean, that's a lofty goal in an 8-hour workday. Like 1 hour out of eight
Yeah.
is, that's pretty good. And if you work at a company where you've got a market research team that's constantly digging up people to talk to, okay, that might be easy. But even he had to be creative about like, where am I going to find these customers? So he would go to whatever grocery store on his like walk into the office and stand in the diaper aisle and like watch people interact, watch them look at all the options and all these things. And he would like go up to them and like talk to them like, hey, why did you pick that? Or, have you been using this one long? And he just got the conversation started. And I think, it's one thing to talk to the actual decision makers in the minute of the decision, which is really cool. And he, as you said, he wasn't salesy. He wasn't trying to convince them to buy his. He just wanted to know why they were making his decisions. So approaching it with this like curiosity and not the goal of like, I need them to pick my brand off the shelf. Just let me watch this. It's like, watching animals in the wild, just try to figure out what they're gonna do. And that really resonated with me. Like I had like a 3 foot rule. You talk about your kind of like rules and principles. When I was running Smart Bride, I had a 3 foot rule. If anyone came within 3 feet of me, I would try to tell them about Smart Bride. And that was sales. That was awareness generating for sure. But what you learn is really interesting, right? When you start up those conversations, I remember I was on a ferry on the way back from Toronto Island once, and there was about a 90-year-old man sitting beside me. And I was like, well,
Mhm.
like, this is not my target demo. This for sure is not, he's not a Smart Bride user. He's not buying and selling wedding dresses or decorations. And I had a really lovely conversation with this guy, and his granddaughter had just been married. And he's like, can I take your card? I think, like, there's no one size fits all. I think you have to just be really open. Like, go in curious. Don't try to direct the conversation. Really listen because we don't even know the right questions to ask half the time. If you're trying to invent something, like maybe you'll have an hypothesis, but I think there's just these golden nuggets we're not getting to because we have an agenda. So we have to go in really like blank slate and listen carefully and let them kind of meander around sometimes in the conversation and pull out what's important.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I think what you're also saying is don't just speak to people don't just get out
Yeah.
of the office and
Yeah.
and see what's going on out
Mhm.
there. I think the other thing too is learning to really understand what people are saying to you. And I'm not really big on academic terms, but cognitive dissonance, they're
Mhm.
doing it one way, but they're not happy. And everyone, so many people quote Henry Ford, if I had asked the customers, they would have said, they wanted a faster horse. And I say that's absolute nonsense. They would have said they wanted to go somewhere faster, warmer, and drier. The fact that that could have been, an MVP of a car, they're not supposed to know that, but they are telling you exactly what they want.
Sometimes I think they're not telling you in words clearly, right? And that's probably what you're experiencing too, is like you can watch them and they're getting on their horse with like, a giant slicker that they're wearing
Yeah.
and it's nice out and you're like, huh, why do you have, why are you wearing this stuff? And they're not going to tell you in articulately in words. Well, I'm not sure if it's going to rain in 2 hours, so I've come wearing this. And then you have to interpret, all right, they'd prefer to have like not that chance of rain and be stuck in this atmosphere. So sometimes I think they're telling you, but in not so many words.
Hmm.
You have to be the interpreter and
Yeah.
find the really cool stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you talked about, what was it, a 3 foot rule?
Yeah.
So I,
I'm sure I annoyed so many people. So many
ah,
people.
it's okay. I'm sure
Yeah.
it was all good. But I
Yeah.
also have what I call the 50 block rule,
Okay.
meaning if I'm speaking or at a conference or at whatever, in another city, New York, for example, is probably the best one. I'll walk at least 50 blocks.
Right. Yeah.
Because the change, from Soho, NoHo, Tribeca,
Hmm.
Gramercy, up
Hmm.
Fifth, whatever, it just shows so many different approaches, so many different
Yeah.
cultures, so many different types of people, so many approaches to lifestyle, to
Mhm.
retail. And wow, just don't, unless you're in a hurry, don't get in a cab. Well, don't get in the cab in New York if you're in a hurry. Don't take the subway.
Yeah, that's so true. Like even things like the way they like put out their garbage and pick up garbage is different per neighborhood. And it's like mind blowing. I mean, these things are not that far away. 50
Hmm.
blocks is not that crazy.
No,
So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting even within Toronto and the GTA about how we do things in East York compared to Mississauga, or like it's
yeah.
not far, we're not that different, and everybody's approach is so on all sides, I guess.
Absolutely. So another thing you wrote about was contagious enthusiasm and obsession with metrics. So let's break that down. What's contagious enthusiasm?
I think one of the things I learned really early on, and one of my first jobs kind of out of university was with a sporting goods store in Edmonton, where I grew up. And it was a family-run business, but it'd been around 75 years, and the general manager and everybody was part of this family. And I've never seen somebody more enthusiastic every day. And the one guy, he had sort of retired, but I think in a family business, you never really retire. So he handed the reins over, but was like still very, very involved. And he just came to the store all the time with like so many ideas. And we all thought they were crazy at the time, but he never let up. Like he was like, nope, we're doing this. It seems impossible, but we're gonna make it happen. And some of them were amazing and some of them were crazy. And like, but he was so he had this way about him that he could, either because he was the boss, he could tell you had to do it, but also he had this enthusiasm that was like, made you want to try and tackle this thing with him, this crazy idea. So I think that was my kind of first exposure to the, probably the first like inventor or person that was really pushing the envelope. And so I took that into some of my jobs, where maybe at AOL, doesn't even exist really anymore, but they wanted, I think they had $150,000 left of budget in the year. And as a Canadian subsidiary, you're like, if you don't spend it, you don't get it the next year. So like have to find something that we could do with this $150,000, which isn't that much money, right? Like that is gonna give us a return or give us a boost. So they were like, Andrea, it's October, by the way. So we literally have from like October to December to spend this money. And they're like, what do you want to, what can we do with it? You have ideas. What can we do with this 150,000? So the team at the time, we decided we would do these, it was called AOL music sessions, and we could choose all these artists and film and record live sessions with them. It was really cool. And we had just enough money to do six and just enough time to like squeak it out by December 31st to film them all. But we didn't have the resources. We didn't even have the knowledge. I think we flew down to the US and watched them film one just to try to learn like what do we do and what does the B-roll interviews look like, and the finished product and all this kind of stuff. And the only way I had to get it to the finish line was to get everybody excited, because I was asking favors that were outside of everybody's jobs. It was just me and then nobody else supporting. So leading with that kind of like contagious enthusiasm to get people on board and get people excited and all be going to one goal, I think has served me all along the way. Like just getting people excited about where you're trying to
Yeah,
go makes such a difference.
yeah. But you bookend it. I mean, it's real left brain, right brain. You bookend it with an obsession with metrics, which, hey, at the end of the day, we're in business.
Yeah.
And if somebody says to me, well, when's it going to become profitable or is it going to work? I don't take that badly, because the truth is as an entrepreneur, I'm a very passionate person, but
Totally.
don't want to
Yeah.
lose the house,
I think the metrics part for me is like not just the total, like not just the, okay, were we profitable, but like right down to the unit economics of, if we scale this thing, is that going to work? And what those
Mhm.
like really those indicators are early, if this is onto something. And I think that's back to the constant experimentation. Is like, all right, I developed a new feature for Smart Bride where they can save this dress, or send to a friend or whatever it is, like how much is it getting used? Are they sending it to themselves? Like, what are they doing with this thing? And just like getting down into those details and then figuring out, okay, like what does that tell us? Is this working? If not, shut it down. So it's like not just the aggregate numbers, but the really finite details. And I think if you're not interested in like the cogs and the wheels and all of that stuff, you're gonna like the big number, you won't even know what's making it tick. So
Yeah.
for me, the obsession is like the little stuff that makes the big stuff in the end.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I mean, my late dad. I mean, he was a very successful entrepreneur. And when I started up, there was computers all around, and he still had that ledger paper. And he had a very partner in a very sizable business. And I got to tell you, he could get to within, I don't know, $1,000 or less of the bottom line each month faster
Amazing.
than the
Yeah,
controller. He just
totally.
knew the business.
One of the really eye-opening things, I was an entrepreneur in residence, just like not downtown Toronto for a small company. They had lots of clients for building websites, so like plumbers and all these tradespeople was really like you've been trained to do something totally different. You don't know how to market your business, so they did this like sort of a subscription based, and they had all these harebrained schemes. So they wanted me in there to try to figure out like, all right, how's this working? They had something in like kind of the Golf Now type of sphere and all these things. But every morning, if you walked past this guy's office, he had a piece of paper like that he kept underneath his keyboard where he like went in and checked all the various bank accounts and wrote these numbers down. And it's like
Mhm.
what you track and what you watch is what grows. And I just
Yeah.
thought, like, of course, we're in all this, like everything you do is digital. You're building websites for people, you're doing all these things, and you have this piece of paper that's like hidden under your keyboard. So no
Yeah.
one else can see it. So it's like it doesn't have to be like so technical and all these things. It's just where you put your attention.
No, absolutely. And again, I'll just quote my dad. He said, you got to find, like my first was in manufacturing. He said, whatever business you're in, you have to figure out who the shipper receiver is.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
because, and he was right. I mean, he said, you go and talk to your shipper receiver every morning, you're going to know one, what goes out, and two, what's coming back. And
Yeah,
he or she, whoever the shipper receiver is, will tell you super quickly if there's a pattern of challenges or problems. So
right.
I don't care if you're digital, somewhere there is a daily trigger of, oh my God, that's happened 10 times versus three. What's up?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's I mean, now we can use AI for all of these sorts of things, right? Because everything's datafied and tracked, but that was your barometer. That was the
Yeah,
litmus test. Like that was the person recognizing the patterns and like the data loops, right? It
yeah.
was a person. And if they cared and if they were paying attention, then amazing source of information. But if they just went through the motions, I think you would miss out on a lot of that like context and color to what's going on.
So listening to you speak for the last 20 odd minutes, I don't think any would be surprised to hear that you won an innovation award from Women in Payment. So what was that about? What triggered it?
Yeah, I mean, it was so amazing to receive recognition. I think I've been inventing and kind of scheming for my entire life since I was small. So this is an arena that I've been playing in for a long time, but I was sort of toiling away quietly, like generating ideas and starting businesses or helping other people with their businesses. And I mean, you don't really think about awards and doing those things. It's more just you enjoy doing it. And so it was nice to receive the recognition. I think when I look back, there's lots of times where I've put out ideas and maybe it doesn't feel like they're taken seriously. So maybe the
Mhm.
award is a bit of a like a boost that, we see what you're doing. You're not just working away in the background. Like in 2014, I pitched PayPal at the time. It was the first time I worked there to do like a tap to pay feature so that people using Kijiji in Canada could pay each other like
Hmm.
on their phones. And they were like, oh, that's so crazy.
Who
And
knew?
like we're 10 years later and Apple just launched like tap to pay for their phones. So
Yeah.
I think it feels like a little bit good to that people are recognizing that some of these ideas, are pushing the boundaries and are innovative. And lots of times when you work for other people, your remit is sort of like, what are we doing in the next 2 months or 6 months or 12 months even, and not the like, what's 10 years out? What's 5 years out? Like, is this even possible? And I think that to me is kind of where I'd love to, be in a position where those are the problems I'm trying to solve, the like tomorrow problems, not the today problems. So it's been really cool. When I accepted the award, they tell you to prepare, but you prepare, but you don't really think it's going to happen, I guess. So I got up there, and there's 400 or 500 people looking out at you, and I said, like, we've been all the women in the room, especially women. We do this day in and day out, and we don't really talk about it. And so now it's time to like share these ideas more, like, louder, more boldly. Like, we have a good idea, and you're like, you tell one person, and then the little sketch you made goes in your desk or recycle bin, and then it's over. So I really challenged the audience to just share more, like, share more of your ideas. They're not all going to be great, but like, be brave and be bold and just keep talking about them. Yeah, it was an incredible night, and there was lots of different winners in all kinds of categories. So it's really nice to meet everybody who'd been toiling away in our industry, and finally getting some recognition for it.
Well, that's awesome, and obviously very, very well deserved. So congrats
Thank
on
you.
that. So sharing ideas. I haven't caught all of them, but I've actually seen most. You are doing something through LinkedIn called the 100 Days of Ideas. And these aren't quick one-liners, Andrea. Like, you've got points in there, you've got some structure to it, you've got some pictures. Like, what what moved you to do this?
So I mean, this is a long time coming. I think I was just in preparing to talk to you today. I was looking at my Evernote files, and I had a note from 2017, or no, 18, where I was trying to do a month of ideas. And I had
Okay.
jotted them down. Like you said, then it was like one-liners, and I got to five, and I like petered out. So, I mean, it's something I've been thinking about for a really long time. I was really curious. People ask me all the time, like, where do you come up with this stuff? Like, why are you so creative? I can't even think of like one thing. And I didn't have an answer for them. Like, I don't know, I just do. And so it got me really curious, like, how come it's easy for me when it's hard for other people? And I was reading lots and almost trying to figure out the magic formula for being creative. Like, what does the headspace have to be? What does the external environment have to be? Like, how do you set yourself up to be creative? And the last piece of that puzzle, after all the research I was doing and all these things, was to challenge myself to kind of like put it into practice and then
Hmm.
figure out, like, did I have it right? Is the formula right? Is it not right? Like, could I teach this to somebody else? And life gets in the way and you get busy and all these things. So my like the one I was laughing, the fifth idea, this is like where I stopped apparently, was I was walking somewhere that day and I had to have lunch and I bought a sandwich. And so I was like walking and trying to eat the sandwich. And I'm like, why isn't there better packaging so that people could have sandwiches on the go? And like, in my note, it's like, you could call it a walkwich. Like, these ideas were not the same as they are now. But so actually it was the award um, nomination that spurred getting back on this. And I promised myself, hey, if I win, I'm going to do an idea a day for 100 days. And so, of course, when I won, I got up there and I was like, so I challenged the whole audience. I said, look, I'm going to do this. I'd love for you guys to like follow along and keep me accountable, but I'd love for you to do it too. If you want to do it, or you want to do 10 days, or you want to do whatever it is. And so now I have this 400 people that are holding me accountable to the idea today. And I'm at day 23 was yesterday. So I'm almost a quarter of the way there, and I'm learning a lot. Like, I'm taking a lot of notes on what's going well. And one thing that kind of surprised me is, I had a day from day 11 or something, I have an idea. And all of a sudden on day 22, I'm like, you know what I could add to that one? Like, it's not just an idea and you know, it's out of your mind and you write it down and it goes. I think, you know, there's still things percolating in there that are being added to. And maybe that's one learning is it doesn't just happen in a moment, right? Like
Hmm.
you improve it, you change it, you get all these things. So I think I don't know why I picked 100. I think it sounded good, like the number sounded round. And I know that you need like 90 days to kind of
So's
form a
10.
real habit, but I'm feeling it. On day 23, I'm feeling
Wow.
it.
Yeah, that's definitely a marathon of ideas. But as I said, I've
I
been
think it's
following
gonna
them.
be cool. Yeah.
It's awesome. And
Yeah, they're all over the place. Like sometimes it's something that happened that day. Other times it's, you know, something like I've noticed for a long time that I want to solve. Some of them I'm like diagramming and like, you know, I've like sometimes it's a sketch and I don't take pictures of the sketches sometimes because they're just like I don't think you can read my writing, but you know, sometimes it's just on the back of the napkin. I try to put, as you said, I try to put some structure and format to them just for my own, like keeping track of it myself. And so people can interpret what the heck I'm talking about. But yeah, it's been good. And I hope by the end of it to sort of have like a playbook for myself and that I can share. That's like, what do you do? How do you set yourself up to be creative and be problem solving? And for me, I think one of the things we don't think about, this goes back to your question about talking to people, is recognizing a problem to solve doesn't come easily to everybody. So that's a skill to hone in the first place. Like how do you be more aware and how do you see the opportunities and then let alone come up with a solution to the opportunity?
yeah. But
Mm.
and the other thing, I think the third part is that you bank them. Because you never know, as you're saying. I mean,
For
I have
sure.
an idea 10 years ago that's out
Yeah.
in the market now. You never know.
Yeah. I know there's one the yesterday's was around or actually the one of the very first ones was because at the conference, the Women in Payments conference, the audio was really bad. And the whole audience was like really frustrated because they couldn't hear and they didn't want to interrupt to be like, we can't hear you. And so, you know, sometimes it's just and I don't have any background in audio, like sound engineering or any of this stuff. So, you know, I'm Googling things and figuring out like how could this work? And it's time consuming. I mean, definitely, I don't think I understood how excited I would get about the research to solve the idea. So the documentation is one thing, you know, that takes a certain amount of time and that's okay. But sometimes an hour or two could go by and I'm like, oh, I'm still working on this. Like, okay, I gotta ship this. Like, you know, it's
Yep.
11:57 and I have to get this out. So I think I'm delighted about how fun it is for me. Not so delighted on how much time it's taking me to do them every day, but I think it's an awesome learning experience.
Well, you know what? At the end of the 100 days, you add some structure, you get a book. So you never know.
Yeah, exactly. Or a you know, a talk or a course or I don't know what it
Yeah.
needs to be, but I'm excited to share it. I'm excited to, you know, like I think even doing it for 10 days, you know, the 100 might be a little lofty for like most people, but even doing it for 10 days,
Yeah.
you'll learn a lot.
Yeah. Well, and what I do, and I think I try and teach people this in our Ingenuity workshops and
Mm.
whatnot. I've been doing it for years. All of my notes, and I just put them into a folder, are done on grid paper.
Yeah.
And, and what I do with the grid paper is that I make sure that I never write on any line. I sketch, I write between lines, I write slanted, and it just sort of it's just sort of that visual reminder of, okay, we'll get to the structure, but right now, take some colors,
Yeah,
draw some pictures.
I can't even use lines.
Yeah,
Like a blank. I like even the lines are too restrictive for me, so I just use blank paper, like always just blank. It's hard to find blank notebooks, by the way.
it is.
Definitely not the norm.
Andrea Lown, I mean, it's been a pleasure speaking today. It's amazing how fast these talks go on Say Hi to the Future. Just before we go, the one last question. What are some of the AI-driven innovations in your industry that you're curious about? Because I mean, AI is on top of everybody's mind these days.
Yeah, I mean, every business is likely racing to figure this out and where it can be used. But in payments and kind of e-commerce, I think the rise of kind of these vertical specific AI assistants, so it could be like fashion or fitness or whatever it is, they seem to be really, like they're radically changing product discovery. So like you're looking for something, you're shopping for something, and before we used to just use Google search, right? And we relied on their ever-changing algorithm to hope that we got good results, but we all know there's ways to gamify that system. So, you're getting a lot of like big businesses and all these people who could afford to play the game or sponsor and come up on top, all that kind of stuff. So I think this AI stuff's going to change the way we search, the way we find stuff, the way we discover things. And, as we get the learning models and the data loops going, like even at a cold start, if we knew nothing about the person searching, you get to pretty decent results even now. And then maybe you add this element of like unlimited data collected about every single one of us. We're amassing these huge portfolios of data, and that leads to just incredible personalization. So you take the discovery model and then you layer on everything about you, and in theory you should get the exact perfect thing for you in less time, like super fast.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think everybody's the real key to it seems to me, is going to be this identity and like protecting your own data. So that seems like something we haven't even gotten into yet, is we've got all this data on you. How do you consent to us using it? Who gets to use it? How often? Like that to me is going to be big direction on who do we even trust to store that data about us. Like I'm not sure there is a company right now that I would give everything to. Medical records and shopping history and all this stuff.
There you go. A lot of change, a lot of distance covered in our discussion today. It's been an absolute pleasure,
Same
Andrea,
for
and
me. Thank you.
chance meeting a decade ago, and thankfully LinkedIn keeps people together. So thanks
Yeah,
again for
amazing.
being on Ingenious Thinkers.
Thank you.